Welcome, beautiful buddies and gentlemen family. In today's video, we'll be reacting to this athletic video that I got sent in the group chat. PSG versus Inter. Who will win the Champions League? Let's take a look at this very interesting video.
Hello and welcome to all of you on the Athletic FC YouTube channel. My name is Duncan Alexander, and today on this special episode of the Athletic FC Tactics Podcast, we're going to preview the Champions League final between Inter and PSG. I'm joined today by Mark Carey.
Hi, Duncan Alexander.
Hello. And Liam Thong.
Hello, Duncan Alexander.
Hello. So two teams with quite contrasting styles are going to meet in the final in Munich on Saturday. We're going to break down how we think this one is going to play out. Let's start by focusing on Inter, who obviously were finalists a couple of years ago, lost to Manchester City. Liam, do you want to run through how we think they might line up for the game?
So our colleague Michael Cox did a piece earlier on during the league phase, I think it was, sort of outlining how Inter, one of the most sort of unique teams in Europe there. They play a back three, almost exclusively under.
Yeah. I mean, there aren't that many teams that play a back three. And there aren't that many teams that play with a back three with two strikers as well. No, I can't think of. Like, I've seen Ligue 1 teams adapt versus us with their five defensive, but yeah, no team. I would say maybe Leverkusen. Leverkusen is the closest because they also play a 3-5-2-ish.
Zaghi have done for a few years now, and it's had them real success in cup competitions. They can drop into that back five. I think some of the super strengths of those wing backs out wide, Federico Di Marco and Denzel Dumfries, have got real sort of pace and attacking license to push forward. And the way then that works in sort of the middle of the pitch, it's quite a technical midfield trio with Mkhitaryan, Çalhanoğlu and Barella that have played together for years now and can rotate so seamlessly. Often they'll be dropping out into fullback spots. Expect to see sort of overlapping, underlapping fullbacks. Alessandro Bastoni, especially from left centre back, and that front two has caused, I think, so many teams so many problems because a lot of teams now defend with the back four. They're going man for man up against Marcus Thuram and Lautaro Martinez.
Exactly. For example, Paris Saint-Germain, we sit in like a three at the back. Nuno tucks in with the two centre backs. Sometimes a bit extra offensive. Nuno goes up, maybe a midfielder drops back because we're usually facing a striker and two wingers. But now we're basically facing two strikers and two wingers in the two fullbacks, which means you got to have one deeper because we push up Hakimi basically be an attacker. But we're going to be facing both of the fullbacks, including because the strikers are going to be holding out to Pacho Marquinhos, and then their fullbacks are going to have to be defended by Nuno and Hakimi. So maybe this will force Paris Saint-Germain to play in a way we haven't seen them play this season because we've never had to face this threat before.
Guardiola referenced it a couple of seasons ago before the final that Inter are so good at sort of drawing you onto them, baiting the press, and then they kind of skip over it really well, but not all the way in behind. They'll hit one of the front two, and they tend to set the ball down and get that wing back out nice and early. So yeah, they can be really threatening for teams like PSG who will try to press them.
Yeah, all the dads out there who complain that no one plays two up top anymore. Here's your team to get behind on Saturday. Mike, you've noted how strong Inter have been throughout this edition of the Champions League. Looking at time spent in winning, drawing, and losing positions, or game state, as we like to call it.
Game state, as we like to call it.
Yeah, and some pretty extraordinary numbers from Inter.
Yeah, it's crazy. I've spoken about this on our Tactics podcast.
How long has every side been in each game state? And Inter Milan have been in the game state of losing only 1% in the Champions League this season. 1% losing, 49% drawing, and 50% winning. PSG 14% losing, 41% drawing, and 45% winning. I mean, we're still one of the most impressive teams when it comes to that stat. Only Inter and Dortmund have been in a losing position less than Paris Saint-Germain. But I was a bit surprising how low Barca are in this statistic. But obviously, this is the most dangerous thing about Inter Milan. And I would say maybe one of the best examples on why Inter beats Barca. Barca were pretty much always trailing. They always had to react to respond to what Inter did, which put them in a game floor where they're always having to react to the opponent. And Inter were very comfortable in that tie. That's why it's very crucial for me to put that goal onto Inter. The only time they've been down, I believe, was against Bayern München. Bayern obviously scored from Harry Kane. Inter got goal very quickly. So they do not like to be in an uncomfortable position. And that's the position we have to put Inter in. Something that Barca only put Inter in for like 5 minutes after that Rafinha goal.
A couple of times now that cumulatively across the whole of the Champions League phase, they've only spent 16 minutes in a losing game state, which is bonkers in itself for a team who's going to get to the final. It's even more crazy when you think about how many games there have been in this iteration of the Champions League. And considering the number of teams that they played, or the types of teams they played Barcelona and Bayern Munich across 2 legs, Arsenal, Manchester City, Bayer Leverkusen, among others as well. So the context of all of that added together is just crazy. Just 1% of the time they spent in a losing game state, which among the last 16, the nearest to them is Borussia Dortmund, which surprised me a little bit considering Dortmund went out earlier on in the knockout phase, and the nearest to them is 13%. So it's not even close when you think about it like that. But I think as much as anything, sort of tactically, their ability to then be able to implement the style that Liam referred to, if you're in at least a drawing game state, or of course in a winning game state, you can then fulfill and activate those tactical ideas when you're sort of in a position of comfort or position of strength. So they're able to stay compact in that 5-3-2 out of possession, spring forward, and need to, like Liam mentioned, with the two up front, and just the sort of the general experience that they have in the squad to be able to be calm in that sort of drawing game state as well. I'm sure we're going to come on to the more specifics. I know that you and I speak about this a lot, Duncan, in terms of duel percentage and how it can be quite a vague statistic. But just moving it on to sort of how much they do like to win those battles as much as possible. It's 54% in terms of their duel percentage. That's better than any team who've played 5 or more games in the Champions League. So it's just thinking about their ability to, as I say, implement the style that they want to, be a little bit frustrating to the opposition at times, and sort of win headers, win second balls, and bring themselves upfield. It seems like they've got a really clear way of playing, and they're able to do it because more often than not, they're not in a losing game state.
Yeah, I mean, the final's been played in Germany as well, the home of duels as a metric. So something for the locals to look out for in the game. Liam, obviously, all those things there, including their experience. Is there anything else that you kind of put their almost supernatural ability to manage games down to?
Yeah, I really don't think we should underrate at all the importance of experience, particularly in the big games, individually as much as collectively.
Yeah.
It's a team that's changed a little bit since the last Champions League final a couple of seasons ago. Romelu Lukaku and Dzeko were striker options at the time that aren't at the club anymore. Andre Onana was at Inter, was really good that season. Is obviously now not quite hit the same heights at Manchester United. So it's changed a bit, but the core of the squad is largely the same. I think that really matters. They've had 7 cup finals under Inzaghi. They've won 5 of them, so they've got a really good return. Admittedly, I think they'd won the first 4 under him and then lost a couple more recently, including to Milan in the Italian Cup this season. So some issues there. They kind of had a reputation for being the king of the cups, I think, for a while in Italy, and obviously progressed more in the league. But tactically, one thing that really stands out, Mark and I were going through some of the video of them the other day, just how good they are at either having the ball for long periods or being without the ball for long periods, and actually keeping games, I think, a bit more low intensity and a bit less chaotic than some other teams might do. I think Barcelona was a great contrast to that. The actual number of possessions, so this is the total number of times they have the ball for a long sequence, not the percentage number people often see. It's below the average in the Champions League this season, so they're really good at saying, if an opposition team has the ball, as Mark mentioned, drop back, sit in. They're not too aggressive. They're not always trying to force a turnover. Their proportion of sort of midfield third tackles compared to PSG is quite hilarious to look at. They've had 46 in the Champions League this season, and PSG are one of the top teams with 119. So Inter are very content to sit back an awful lot more and be a bit more pragmatic.
Yeah, and I mean, it won't be anything new for PSG. And, maybe luckily, if you look at the teams we've faced, a lot of them are a bit similar to Inter Milan, where they are a bit more defensive, they are a bit more conservative. Liverpool, Villa, Inter, Arsenal, all of them were more defensive, more conservative sides coming up against Paris Saint-Germain, which goes along with Inter. But also the teams that Inter have faced, Bayern and Barca, two, heavy attacking sides, similar to PSG as well. So we're a bit prepared for the way that they want to play. They want to give us the ball. Great, we can have the ball. Then obviously there will be some moments where they press us higher a bit, push the field up, and they will give us space. So he's giving examples that Inter can play in 2 ways and are very good in both ways, either with the ball or without the ball. Same goes for Paris Saint-Germain, which makes this game obviously extremely exciting because whoever team has the ball, both teams aren't in a weak position.
And it helps, I think, also that they've scored 9 times in the opening half hour of matches this season in the Champions League, only conceded 1, so it does then set them up to play that way. Times in the opening half hour of matches this season.
Wow, they've scored 9 goals in the opening 45 minutes. That's definitely something we have to be a bit worried for.
The Champions League.
And they've only conceded 1. We got to change that too.
To play that way, and by comparison, actually, PSG have started really fast in some of their games that we'll come on to. So that that's an area where they might need to do that. Otherwise, Inter might get control of the game.
Yeah, it's a cliche, isn't it, to sort of say the first 10 minutes are going to be key in a game, but I think it really will set the tone of this match, depending who starts better. I mean, there's loads of contrast between the two sides, in terms of formation, in terms of the way they construct play, the way, how much they like to attack. But age profile is another big contrast. Do you want to compare and contrast, Mark?
Yeah, well, I'll start with Inter, that they do have the oldest average squad age in the Champions League this year, and I think it's interesting to talk about their squad in general and the tweaks that they make across the squad from European football to domestic football as well. And I looked at, as much as anything, looked at the total changes they made in Serie A this season, which I think is interesting considering how far they've gone in terms of the title race and being able to compete in Europe as well. They've made 119 total changes in Serie A, and they've only been unchanged twice. So they do like to keep it fresh and make sure that they are rotating their squad sort of healthily. And just to bring it back to Serie A very briefly, that by way of comparison, their title challenges in terms of Napoli have made total changes of just 47 across the whole season, which is comfortably the lowest at the time of recording. So I think comparing and contrasting that is interesting as well. And the changes that they make in terms of the squad management, I think is interesting in terms of the wing backs. Obviously, for the final, we'd expect DeMarco and Dumfries to be the ones to start, but Carlos Augusto and Matteo Darmian have played a healthy chunk of minutes this season as well. And Darmian is able to play as a right centre back at times. He's able to play on the left hand side as well, but I think he came on against Barcelona in the second leg and filled in at right centre back brilliantly as well. So they've got a bit of variation in that regard as well. And the centre backs, Lee mentioned how settled they are as a side through the spine of the team, but they've got De Vrij, Bisek, Pavard, Acerbi, and Bastoni all to kind of rotate, all fantastic centre backs that they can rotate with. It's likely that it will be the 3 that we mentioned earlier who will be starting at centre back, but they have got players who can easily slot in. And then you think about the changes that they've made in the game as well. For Tazy obviously coming on and scoring, they've got a really good balance in the squad, and there's no real drop off in quality when things change. But in terms of the squad minutes overall, again, just looking at it in terms of Serie A, there's only been 2 players who have played more than 75% of the available minutes, one of them being Jan Sommer, so only 1 outfield, and that's Lautaro Martinez. So I think they are, Inzaghi is able to rotate and manage the squad really well. They've got a few players over 30, as I mentioned at the start. They've got a lot of players who are or the average age of the squad is on the older side, but they do have a lot of players who are in their peak years. So you could argue that they're just ready to win now, and they are hoovering up trophies in recent years. So they're just in a position that they know that they can sort of go on and win trophies rather than PSG. But PSG, if they were to maybe lose this final, you can see that the
Yeah, I mean, there's way more desperation when it comes to Inter, especially with Inzaghi potentially leaving to Al Hilal. You know, the squad getting older. You know, Inter every summer here and there lose one of their top players like Hakimi, Lukaku, and so on. So, I mean, this is the year. This is the year for Inter Milan. If they don't win the UCL this season, if they don't beat Paris Saint-Germain this final, I don't see Inter winning in a couple of seasons. As I say, Inzaghi leaving, players getting worse, and some players leaving as well. I don't think the replacements will be as good. So no, there's a lot of desperation for Inter. There's obviously also a lot of desperation for Paris Saint-Germain. We're in the semi-final last season. We've been so good this year. We feel this is the last step to fulfill, you know, the goals, the accomplishments of this season. But we definitely have less pressure in that sense on us. We have different kind of pressure. We have more pressure that PSG has never won the Champions League. Pretty much all of our players, this will be their first time in the Champions League final, wanting to win a Champions League with Paris Saint-Germain. So different kind of pressure for both teams. That's yeah, especially with the age. I mean, I think our average age is like 23.6. Inter Milan's average age is above 30, basically just like that Mourinho side in 2011, and they won it versus Bayern, and this time it's going to be played in Munich.
Ability and age of the squad that they'll sort of come again, whereas this feels like it's a squad that's ready to win now.
Yeah, so if Inter are sort of rotations and experience, PSG are not that. Is that right?
I mean, I do agree. Like, I understand what he says. Like, Inter have a squad that's ready to win. Maybe PSG's not there yet, but I don't think so because we have a way more talented squad. So yes, all of them age-wise aren't in their peak, but I mean, they're just that talented that they don't have to be like in their peak to be ready for it. For example, FC Barcelona, another side that has a very close average age to Paris Saint-Germain. When you look at that side, that's a side that's too young to win it. They lost it due to immaturity, small mistakes, you know, unprofessionalism, just showing their lack of age and lack of experience in the Champions League. But when you look at the Paris Saint-Germain side, how they went away to Liverpool, being 1-0 down, getting a 1-0 lead, holding on to it, and beating them on pens away. I mean, Barca would never be able to do that, for example. So I do agree that this Paris Saint-Germain team is young, is less experienced than this Inter side. When it comes to the readiness, when it comes to the maturity, I don't know, maybe even this PSG team shows more maturity and professionalism than this Inter Milan team. I mean, coach-wise is the biggest thing. Luis Enrique, the leader of the PSG team, is more experienced, more well-known, and a much better coach than Inzaghi. Second of all, the players are more talented. They are confident they can do more what they want to do. If we were up against a side like Barca, we would not have played the way Inter played. Inter heavily respected Barca. We would not have respected Barca. So I do agree. Inter players are in that age gap. They are in that, you know, age region to win the Champions League as well, but I wouldn't put too much into.
I think there's maybe more overlap than we think, but yeah, in terms of age, definitely.
Wow. Looking at PSG's thing here, it's beautiful. Not a single PSG player has played above 75% of all minutes. We don't have a single player above the age of 32 that has played the game. The oldest one being Marquinhos, and then you got some other ones like Skriniar, obviously not part of the squad, Asensio not part of the squad, Kimpembe not part of the squad. Then you got Lucas Hernandez and Fabian Ruiz, and then you got Hakimi Dembele. So age-wise, Paris Saint-Germain doing really well, and rotation-wise, I mean, you can already see we barely like overplayed our players.
And more broadly, sort of PSG as a club in the past couple of seasons of bringing in sort of as much young French talent and broader young European talent as they can. Obviously, you know, years ago having brought in sort of the aging Sergio Ramos, Messi, Neymar, and eventually not quite hit the heights they wanted to with those, and have now gone back the other way. I think they were speaking about sort of a cultural change as much as anything like under Luis Enrique, and you see that this season they've managed Liga really well with the Champions League, and I think it's often a bit of a cliche that they kind of, you know, you could almost give them the title on match day one because it's never really that competitive. But even by PSG standards, they've been even more dominant than previous seasons before. You know, they actually won this title without losing a game. I've lost a couple since winning it, but I believe that's...
Yeah. I would say, look, if you're a non-PSG fan and you don't watch PSG League and so on, if you really want to know how great Paris Saint-Germain are, you know, it's hard a bit for some people because we always win the league. Look at how dominant we are in the league. Yes, we won the league this year, and we won the league last year, and we won the league the year before. But for example, last year we were still comfortable enough, but the year before, I think we won the league by 4 points. This time we won it by like 20 points. So I would say to know how good PSG are, then look if they win the league. Look at how well they win the league or how early they win the league. Because the earliest times we've won the league is the best PSGs. I think we won in early in 18, 19. We're one of the best. That's one of the best PSGs. We're winning early in 15, 16. That's one of the best PSGs. We won it early this season. That's one of the best PSGs as well.
That was the first time any team has won Ligue 1 without actually losing, and they almost went sort of 2 seasons unbeaten away from home under Luis Enrique as well. And you see that now with
Yeah, only lost 1 away game in 2 seasons under Lucho, and I think we lost a total of 4 Ligue 1 games in 4 seasons. Magical.
you look at the minutes and the cluster really of players, not just in terms of the youth, but I think it's 14 players this season that have played between 50% and 75% of Ligue 1 minutes. So you don't need to have these players playing week in, week out, because you're so far clear that they can rotate. They've had the luxury where actually the leagues tried to help them out a bit and reduce from 20 to 18 teams. I believe they had it again this season as they did last year, where in the deeper knockout rounds they actually had games postponed between European match days. So they had a bit more sort of extra time to rest. And maybe they don't actually need, as Mark was saying, with Inter being an older team, they might actually benefit or need the rest a bit more. You might think this team, if they're a bit younger, a bit hungrier, can sort of go again. But as you know, there's a great visit we've got that sort of actually encapsulates the age up against the percentage of minutes played, and often you see a bit more of a spread of players that are playing almost all the time, almost never, and then the real mix of ages. But here it's just one sort of big cluster, and can almost chop off half the vision, and you still keep all the PSG players on there.
I always find it quite interesting in terms of the age profile of 2 teams, especially in the final, because you can reverse engineer the narrative accordingly. So if PSG were to win, you can say it's their youthful exuberance. If they were to lose, it's the naivety. Yeah, exactly. And with Inter, if they win, it's experience. If they lose, it's because they're an aging squad. So I think you can obviously reverse engineer the narrative accordingly. Of course, the run into the final as well, with PSG having wrapped up the title early and Inter having to go all the way to the end of the season. I don't know which is better, to sort of make sure that you're still on task and making sure that you're right at the edge all the way up to the final, or being able to rest and be able to stay as fresh as you can going to the final. I don't think there is a right or wrong way, but however it then transpires, you can reverse engineer the narrative.
Yeah, and that's I think it's a good thing. I think PSG play attacking to defend, whereas Inter play defensive to attack. So it's legit the 2 different contrast teams coming up against each other: an old versus a young, a vibrant offensive, a vibrant more defensive counter attacking. Man, this is such a great final, especially looking back. Some people are trying to hype down this final. Don't do that. Footballistically, this is the best final we've had since Liverpool Madrid in 2018 or Juve Madrid in 2017. Because when we had Tuchel, that was still a good final, but there was no fans. It was one-legged ties into that final, so the vibe wasn't there. Yeah.
Mark's spot on, because I wrote a piece back in December when PSG had won one of their 5 league phase games, and we're genuinely looking at risk of going out, saying, hypothetically, is this PSG team sort of too young or too inexperienced? And when I added up the number of combined European appearances, they actually were on a threshold of, I found someone had done some research on sort of the golden kind of level at which teams have got enough experience collectively, and I think it's about 650 sort of appearances. But that PSG squad was so backloaded in terms of it was the defenders and the midfielders who had kind of all that experience. I think Donnarumma accounted for quite a lot of the caps on his own. So the real worries about going forward, and you saw that almost with how many changes Luis Enrique made throughout the league phase. He made 17 to his starting 11s, didn't have any unchanged 11s that entire time. And since in the knockouts, he's made 9 changes in 8 games and never more than twice. And that's included the fact that Kvaratskhelia has come in the winter window and been an extra option there. And a lot of that really just sort of been him switching his wingers. The midfield and the defence has been really consistent. There was one game where I think Marquinhos was suspended and they had to make a change. But you see he's found a way to make those tweaks and build on the team.
Yeah, no, that is very true. In the beginning of the season, there were some players he wasn't fully trusting in. When it comes to the midfield, I mean, Donna has been basically Donna number 1, even though Safanov has played 2 UCL games. Girona, Donna was injured. And then Bayern, it was a little bit of competition between them. The defense, I think, has been set since day 1. I think the only possible competition that could have happened was Lucas Hernandez, but he was obviously, not healthy since the beginning of the season, wasn't part of the preseason. The midfield, Vitinha, Neves. I think, obviously, Vitinha was always going to be there. The idea of Fabian was always going to be there, but Neves performed so well in the beginning of the season. It was Warren and Fabian competing against each other for the last midfield spot. But ever since 2025, as he mentioned, Fabian has been the starting midfielder. And up in attack, obviously, that's where the most changes have been. We've seen Kangi Lee start games. We've seen Due. We've seen Colomwani. We've seen Asensio. We've seen Dembele, Barcola, and obviously Gonçalo Ramos and Kvaratskhelia. But ever since January, that's when obviously Dembuza always started games. Barcola basically always started competition with Due, and then when Khvicha came, there came the second attacker. So yeah, since 2025 February, somewhere there, we've had a set starting 11, which we didn't have in the beginning of the season.
team, and as I suppose similar to Inter now, actually found quite a settled 11.
Yeah, I think they've done that thing, haven't they? As the tournaments progress and neutrals that watch them, you can kind of now name the PSG team, and it's just embedded in there. I mean, Marquinhos as well. I think he's the only one left from their defeat in 2020 against Bayern.
Him and President Kipembe, but Kipembe's had quite long-standing injury issues, I think, so very much sort of a squad player. But yeah, you can even go back to looking earlier at the first Champions League 11 that Luis Enrique had at PSG, and that was not even 2 years ago now. And I think 6 of the starting 11 aren't there or don't play anymore. So even over that short period of time, there's been so much change.
True.
Going back to Inter, Mark, let's kind of look at how they like to build attacks. We saw how.
And just to finish on that, that's actually one thing I really like about Lucho. Extremely ruthless. Doesn't give like extra chances. He will give you a second chance, but we will not give you extra chances. So yeah, no, the squad overhaul ever since Luis Enrique has came in it's exactly what he wants, and he's been perfect so far.
How effective Denzel Dumfries was in both legs against Barcelona. But they don't always focus on him, so it'd be wrong for PSG just to think we'll stop Dumfries and everything's going to go our way.
Yeah, true. I mean, I find it interesting in terms of the pace in Inter Milan's attack, where if they were to maybe get in behind PSG's defence, I don't think Thuram or Martinez necessarily have the requisite lightning pace to run in behind. Of course, they're fast enough, but I think Dumfries is probably the only one that you think, okay, this player can really get in behind very, very quickly, but then the ball's going to the far side, going away from goal, so it's maybe slightly less of a threat before then, of course, he can cross the ball in, which he's done to great effect a lot in the Champions League this season. But looking at where Inter channeled their attack, so looking at the share across each of the 3/3 in the attacking half of the pitch.
Okay, I mean, it's not good that they do most on the left, because I would say that's our most open. With Nuno staying a bit more defensive on that left side, the right side is more open. Marquinhos is usually up against the right winger, but because they play a double striker, Marquinhos will be up with Lautaro, which means Hakimi has to be tracking Di Marco or Augusto on that left side. That would be that's not good to see.
Channel more of their attack on the left side of the pitch, which is maybe people wouldn't expect, I think, but if you actually think about it and break it down, that Liam mentioned it before, Bastoni likes to stride forward from defence. Di Marco likes to stay nice and high when he can. He'll maybe tuck inside when he can as well, and Mkhitaryan will stay on that side, and those three will often link up. And it's maybe the case of them, what we in tactical terms, I suppose Liam would say, bait and switch. They might try to build up on that side, try and then make sure that Dumfries is isolated on that far side for a crossfield pass, or maybe a cross to the back post, and he's so good in the air as well. So I think it actually does make sense when you look at it in terms of being a little bit more skewed towards the left-hand side, to probably make more space and more room on the right-hand side for Dumfries. And then Barella really likes to underlap at times, and he's really good in terms of his off-ball runs, as well as of course his on-ball quality as well. So I think it does make sense that there's more of a skew towards the left-hand side, in order to make space for the right-hand side.
And set pieces obviously increasingly important in modern football, and Inter are no slouches there.
Yeah, looking at the numbers, it is remarkable. So they've scored 9.5 goals per 100 corners, and we do this intentionally to try and account for opportunity, so that everyone has an equal weighting there. That is comfortably the highest of any team to play 5 or more games in the Champions League this season, and I think it's been covered on site. I think Ahmed Walid has covered this on site, as we often reference our colleague who's done some fantastic tactical work about Inter, I think both in the league and Champions League. But you break it down, and Dumfries, as I just mentioned, is really strong in the air. Bisek coming forward for set pieces, and Marcus Thuram, they've all scored more than once in both the league and Europe from corners, at least. And the set piece threat, we saw it in the Barcelona game as recently as then, in the Bayern Munich game as well, of course.
And that's going to be an issue, because I remember there was some Inter fan in chat I was talking to, and he was saying they're even better than Arsenal. And look, we've suffered. We played Liverpool and Arsenal, 2 of the best set piece teams in the world. Obviously, Arsenal were missing Havertz. We're missing Ben White, fully fitness. They were missing Havertz as well up in attack with Gabriel. So their set pieces could have been better, but I was really impressed by how we defended them. Donnarumma dominating the air, our player winning the first balls, and if a save needs to be made, they're safe. But against Inter, from what they're saying here, from what I've been hearing, we need to be even better. We need to absolutely not be giving away any corners to Inter. Like, by far, probably the best offensive set piece team.
Really
well, it sounds like.
Phases for Inter. And one final thing I'd like to say is just how sort of different it is depending on the side of the pitch that you take the corners from. So there's far more of a likelihood to take out swingers from the right hand side, and far more likely to take in swingers from the left hand side. And we spoke about this yesterday, didn't we? And I think it's ultimately that Çalhanoğlu likes to take. Well, he's the best taker. DiMarco takes it occasionally, but he is the strongest set piece taker. So if you can put it on the money, of course, in the 6-yard box or thereabouts, then you're going to put him on it. So I think that sort of difference in that skew of each side is probably just down to that.
But I wonder at the same time if they might actually switch to in swingers from both sides in the final, if they've got that real threat in terms of the out swingers. But PSG, they've not been particularly poor to actually this season in terms of defending set pieces, but they're not a particularly big team. They're not massively aerially dominant. I think they've been good for the size that they are. But I think about Gianluigi Donnarumma especially, where for a really big keeper, he's not very commanding his box. His shot stopping is perhaps the best of any keeper in Europe right now. It has been in these knockout rounds.
He's actually improved immensely on dominating the aerial threat in his box this season in the Champions League. I do believe we've conceded like 19 goals from set pieces out of like 53 goals or even more like that. We've conceded so many from set pieces. But it's mostly been in the league and cups and so on. In the UCL, we've only conceded one goal from a corner. We considered that disgusting set piece versus Saka in the group stage, but the only corner set piece that we conceded was obviously versus Bayern München, the mistake by Safanov and Nuno that led to Kim Min-jae header. So in the UCL, when we are fully concentrated, when we try to go 1v1 versus every man, we're very good at corners, defending them.
Comes out and tends to catch teams or punch balls in either. So I wonder if that might have the opportunity then to get someone on top of him, a bit like we were seeing with sort of Dumfries, and I think it was the first goal he scored against Barca where he's almost the second phase player there for a flick on. And when you've got three centre backs as Inter often do, you've got the quality from your midfielders and again two strikers plus maybe a wing back or two. That's suddenly 5, 6, 7 really good options that I think is really hard to defend.
Yeah, we saw that in the second leg of PSG Arsenal, didn't we? The first sort of 10-15 minutes, Arsenal were just piling long throws into the box like it was the early 90s. It was, and it nearly worked. PSG, they did kind of manage it.
And Bastoni has the ability to play those long throws as well. So if that was to be a tactic to learn from with Arsenal, you might see it again in the final.
Mark, we kind of touched on how Inter set up. Obviously, they do like to sit deep and counter, which probably quite handy against this PSG team. But what does the data say about sort of the height line, defensive line, and number of fast breaks?
Yeah, I think this is quite interesting. I think so. To answer your first question, they are among the lowest of the teams who made the last 16. We've got a nice viz that shows that they are the 5th lowest. The average defensive line, which we use as a proxy based on the offside, like the average offside line provoked, and it's 24.8 meters on average, which, as I say, is the 5th lowest. Which it's not the lowest among all the teams, but I think it's because they do have a bit of variety in the way that they can sometimes push.
I'm very surprised that we're that low. I thought we would be much higher, like next to Barca and City there, but we haven't played that high, I guess, than in the UCL this season. Maybe it's because we have the ball a lot and we press less. I don't know.
Can be a bit aggressive. Sometimes they can be more comfortable sitting off. I suspect that they'll probably implement a similar style out of possession in the final to how they did against Barcelona, which Liam mentioned is just very disciplined in that 5-3-2 and making sure that they're just shuffling from left to right. So I imagine the defensive line will be quite deep in that regard. But looking at metrics as well, like field tilt, so the share of touches in the respective attacking thirds, their average across the Champions League this season is 37%, which is among the lowest, like right down there among the lowest of any side who played in the competition this season, which is interesting, but also just shows that they are happy and comfortable in that position, which is why I think this final is really interesting. We say a lot about styles make fights. The PSG will probably take the game to Inter more, but Inter are happy to soak up the pressure in that regard. So I think that's hugely interesting. The second, from the direct attack perspective, kind of alludes to what I was saying before, and I don't think Thuram and Martin.
But that's one thing. I think that's also going to give PSG a slight advantage when you look at the two opponents Inter had in the knockout stages in Bayern and Barca. We're actually more conservative, more pragmatic. Something you maybe wouldn't imagine from Luis Enrique's side, but as we saw there, we're like way closer to Inter than a team like Barca when it comes to the defensive line. So I think in this game, Paris Saint-Germain, Inter will be a bit surprised on how many potential occasions we would let Inter have the ball. We would not stay as high up. We would not be as chaotic as FC Barcelona. And that was obviously what made Barca good. What made Barca, score 6 goals against Inter. But that's also what made Inter concede Barca concede 7 goals versus Inter. So I think, yes, when you look at Barca, very offensive team, PSG, very offensive team against Inter. But I think it's completely different sides, actually.
As necessarily the type to spring forward. And I looked at the numbers of their number of direct attacks per 90 minutes this season as a proxy for counter-attacking play, and they're equally among the lowest for that. So it's not like they sit really deep to spring forward really fast and at in high frequency. They'll they'll try and build forward in a more considered manner than necessarily spring forward at a huge pace.
Yeah, I think they're a great example of a team that score goals that tend to catch people out. So I think recently the FA Cup final goal that Palace scored against Manchester City, where people quickly call that a counter-attack because it looks like a kind of vertical flowing move, but really they score a lot of similar goals. I think back to, I believe it was Martinez's first one, or Lautaro's first one, sorry, against Bayern Munich, where they can sort of draw a team onto them, play behind, release the wing back, and that's where they can often be a threat when fullbacks are jumping upfield or sort of get caught, and they can release that wing back because they tend to have the cover of the midfielder.
And that would be crucial. Like Pacho Marquinhos would probably be Lautaro, Pacho on Thuram. You need to win majority of your aerial duels, and the fullbacks need to be following the runs of their fullbacks. The issue is our fullbacks will be starting with the back to the space, whilst Dumfries will have his face to the space. But thankfully, Hakimi is quicker than DeMarco. Nuno is quicker than Dumfries. There's a high likelihood they will recover and match their pace as well. Better than Barca's for sure.
Or a centre back where they can go and won't always be out of position. So I think people might see the goal and go, oh, that looks like a kind of counter-attacking move, because it kind of operates in a similar way and exploits space in that way. And that's a real strength, I should say, as well. It's not like a criticism. That's something that's really good because they get those chances where there aren't defenders around, they're organised, opposition defences. And I think their best strength often is they score the kind of goals that they never really concede because of how compact they can be and how strong they can be defensively. And the one vulnerability, Mark kind of touched on it in terms of how deep they can sit, is when opposition teams can kind of commit that extra defender. Kind of a coach wants to try to do as a bonus back, and I've kind of just stolen the phrase ever since. I think it sounds great, of that sort of left back, right back, or a wing back sort of crashing in. We saw it with the Barca goal where sort sort of the wingers crossing or the fullbacks crossing to the other one. Inter have faced, I think it's 20 crosses, more than 20 crosses, per game this season in the Champions League, which is comfortably the most of any team in the knockouts, and partially has a game state factor we have to consider of not being behind in games so they can sit deep. But from comparison, PSG are at less than 14 a game that they're facing, so it's a real different approach to defending. I think that actually is one area where, PSG aren't a great crossing team, but we'll come on to it and how good they can be sort of in cutbacks where, if they can get Nuno Mendes left back and Achraf Hakimi the right back crashing in, I think they actually might be the more likely goal scorers, a la Rodri was in the Champions League final when City did beat Inter.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that final, because I think a lot of people coming into that final thought City were just going to comfortably win, and they didn't. I think that was, testament to Inter's tactics, but also kind of describes how Champions League finals are. I mean, we haven't seen both teams score in a final since 2018. So the first goal is massive in Champions League finals.
First goal wins.
Yeah, it could be that again. I mean, we've had 4 1-0s in the last 5 finals. I wouldn't be
2-0,
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see another 1-0 in this. But yeah, so that's Inter. Let's switch our attention to Paris Saint-Germain.
Let's go.
Arguably the standout team in the competition this season.
Yes, sir.
Anyway, and me. I guess I'm neutral. But if we focus on the team that beat and upset Arsenal in the semi-finals, how did they do it?
Well, they did it with an early goal. Is the big one in the first leg. That's something that PSG actually for a long time under Luis Enrique didn't manage to do. It was a big issue last season, even though they got to the semi-finals where they sort of would have chances, miss them in the first half, and then need Kylian Mbappe after half time to come up with some moment of magic and sort of break a game open. But we saw it in the 3 knockout games against Premier League teams this season. I think it was inside 12 minutes in the away game in all of them where they scored against Arsenal, Liverpool, and Aston Villa. So there was previously a stat where in their first 19 European or Champions League first halves under Luis Enrique, PSG only scored 5 times, and that's up to when they played Bayern Munich this season in the league phase, and in the 9 games since, so the final 3, I think it was, league phase games and then the knockouts. They've scored in 8 of the 9. Apart from obviously the Liverpool home game where they were so dominant and then just couldn't find that goal and Liverpool hit them with the sucker punch.
And I always used to bring up that stat, and it's even worse at the Parc des Princes. I think at the Parc we played like 9 games in the Champions League under Luis Enrique since last season, and we've only scored in the first half twice. Atletico Madrid this season, and I believe AC Milan last season. So that was definitely Paris Saint-Germain's like Achilles heel, biggest problem. But at the moment, it has improved immensely, obviously, which will be huge for this Champions League final. As they mentioned, the stats I also knew about. Since 2018, we haven't seen a UCL final where both teams have scored. So that's why I'm expecting a low-scoring game, because it's a final. If this game was played in a one-legged semi-final, it would be different. But a UCL final, man, second time here. I don't know that much about UCL final.
I think tactically that owes so much to how flexible that forward line can be now. You see kind of the mirror image goals that they have against Arsenal and against Liverpool, where Dembele can drop in. His move from winger to number 9 is really sort of transformed the team. He's so flexible and can rotate out wide. The wingers can come in and switch around. You get John Evers sometimes being a player then that from central midfield goes and plays on the last line. You can kind of move them all around. It's more, I'd say, positional interchanges than it is kind of rotations, because the overall structure in terms of who's pinning, who's being an anchor, who's sort of roaming or rotating is all kind of the same. And I think the biggest strength now is how many goals they get from cutbacks. So we were sort of talking about Inter and defending crosses, but I was mentioning to Mark yesterday, I think the biggest issue might be actually not those balls into the box, but then pulling it back a little bit deeper. You see the goal that Dembele scores against Arsenal is, he's putting off the edge of the area. Declan Rice has gone over to double up on Kvaratskhelia and leaves it free. They've scored 6 times this Champions League season from cutbacks, which is the most of any team. And we've got a great list that sort of maps them all there. And a lot of them are sort of back towards the penalty spot. They're not even into the 6-yard box. They're not even targeting that area. They don't really have. Well, they do have a number 9. That's Gonzalo Ramos, but he's more of sort of an option off the bench. It's the most of any team in the Champions League this season, more than PSG had in the previous 3 seasons combined, which I think is fantastic and testament to just how clinical they've been this time. It's something that I think has eluded them an awful lot. So I think, as we mentioned, with sort of Inter occupying the strikers or Dembele, it might be someone else following in from midfield or perhaps fullback to crash onto one of those.
Mark, Liam's obviously talked then about cutbacks. Is that kind of reflected in sort of where they like to attack overall?
Yeah, it's interesting because we're looking at things across the season average here, and if you look at a similar visualization, looking at where they channel their attack across the attacking half of the pitch, it's skewed more towards the right-hand side. But I do think, to Liam's point, especially the interchange across the front 3, you'd be able to explain it better than me, Liam, in terms of how often they've been doing that more towards the start of the season. It feels like, especially since Dembele's positional change, that it's more towards the second half of the season. So this sort of skew towards the right-hand side does feel like it still makes sense, because, well, I'll come on to it, but I think it's because of Hakimi's sort of getting forward more so from
yeah,
right back.
exactly.
I do think because a lot of it is taking into account the league phase as well, that there's maybe, if you looked at maybe across the most recent 5 games, it might look a little bit different because of that rotation or the interchange, as you said, Liam, across the front 3, it maybe be a little bit more evenly distributed. But I guess across the whole of this season in the Champions League, it does make sense when you think about Hakimi making those runs forward, underlapping runs, and we saw it across multiple games in the knockout stages, him popping up with important goals, actually more from central positions as much as anything, because he's tucking inside. So it does make quite a bit of sense, but in the final, I think we would expect to see a bit more even coverage across the thirds, because each of those front 3, Kvaratskhelia, Doué, and Dembele, which I think we suspect will be the front 3, of course Barcola as well, if he gets on the pitch, that each of them will pop up in any one of those thirds, if you like, or be dropping deep, and then, as you said, some midfielders maybe popping up on the last line as well. So maybe it's.
And that's another thing for the UCL final. Once again, I'm making a lot of comparisons from the Inter-Barca game. Barca, it was 90% of attacks came from the right side, obviously because Rafinha, apart from goal scoring and maybe a key pass in the final third, He's very irrelevant. And they were also obviously missing Alejandro Balde. So when it came to Barca, Inter, that's why I said that I felt Yamal was nullified in that second leg, because Inter, after playing the first game, they were like, you know what, let's just double/triple up on Yamal, and Barca would not be able to create that many chances against us. And that's exactly what they did, and it worked. Against Paris Saint-Germain, though, we will have threat from the central areas. I mean, Barca, they're only good. Like, Ferran wasn't good, especially in that second leg. Olmo wasn't good. Like, it was only Pedri, and Pedri wasn't even that good. As PSG, look at our midfield with Dembouz as the false nine. And then you look at the wings. Barcola, Nuno, Hakimi, Kvara. Oh, yeah. It's going to be a long day for Inter, man. It's going to be a long day. And if they're expecting what Barca did to them for us to do similar, no. We're going to do it in a different way, in a way better, tougher way.
It's a little bit descriptive, the way that I've seen it and showed it in the right-hand side skew, but I wouldn't necessarily think that would be necessarily predictive for the final. I think irrespective of location as well, it is worth talking about their counter-attacking threat, but their ability to counter at pace, but also to knock the ball around for long periods as well. And again, looking into the numbers, they have 75 direct attacks in total in the Champions League this season. Again, a metric as a proxy of counter-attacking play. Comfortably the highest of any team this season. Of course, they played more games, but the second highest is 42, which is not even close. And then you have things per 90, and they are still comfortably the highest when you account for minutes played as well. So
that we're the best possession side in the world, I knew. But we were the best counter-attacking side as well. I mean, I knew, but not that big.
Spring forward at pace with the front three and all the players that we mentioned at such pace. But the beauty of their attack is that they can do that if and when the situation allows it, but they can also knock it around for long periods and have long
exactly
play as well. So they're a bit of a Swiss Army knife in being able to do a little bit of both, or French Army knife if you want to call it that, but maybe that doesn't quite work. But if you look at the numbers again, 22.5 sequences of 9+ passes per 90 minutes is the third highest in the competition. So typically, if you've got someone who's high on direct attacks, they'll often be low on the longer sequences of possession. The fact that they're high on both shows that they can mix it up so well. We've seen it across, I suppose, the whole of the competition, but especially in the knockout phases, that ability to do both.
Yeah, and this is something we talked about even last season. Like, we were one of the best possession side and one of the best counter-attacking side. We're usually looking at City, Lucho, Pep, and all of that. Both of us were really high in position, but we were way higher than City in counter-attacks. That was actually the issue for us in the beginning of the season. In the beginning of the season, Luis Enrique, for some reason, was like, we're going to go super possession. Paris Saint-Germain, in the beginning of the Champions League this season, when we struggled a lot, we played way too much possession and way too little counter-attack. Majority of the direct attacks are now. In the beginning of the season, that was an issue for us. We were way too much just about possession. We looked like Luis Enrique's Spain squad in the World Cup. But since the changes have been made, since, Luis Enrique listened to the players, that's when those direct attacks. And I think that's what caused most problems. Liverpool go counter-attack, Arsenal go counter-attack, Aston Villa, a bunch of the goals were from counter-attack. So that's been, for me, the key offensively, especially in the UCL, because it's such a... It's more of a defensive tournament than in a league campaign.
And they're really good now, I think, at playing what the game needs. As Mark says, they can do both sides of it really, really well. And that suits, I think, as much the profile of the forwards they've got. We've kind of gone through Dembele, Doué, and Kvaratskhelia. I think Barcola especially, he now has kind of unfortunately been sort of relegated a bit more to a bench role. He started the season and looked really good. He's put up really good numbers. I think he's in double digits of goals as well as assists and was really flying earlier on in the season. His strength really, though, is sort of running in behind an awful lot, especially on that left-hand side. That kind of a repeat move that PSG had this season was him running in behind the fullback. That pass that goes inside the fullback, then him playing a cutback with Dembele. So I think even though he likely won't start, that's the kind of sub where, Denzel Dumfries, you mentioned how aggressive he can be. That might be kind of the pass that might unlock an Inter defence. But I think we need to sort of give some flowers to the midfielders as well. This PSG midfield three are really well balanced. Luis Enrique took a lot of time. Even last season, he sort of made some tweaks. There was Manuel Ugarte at the start, who Manchester United fans will now be aware of because he's no longer at PSG. But Fabian Ruiz, I think, when he came in last season and through to now, people made a big deal about him scoring sort of his first, I think, Champions League goal in the second leg against Arsenal. But he's really been the glue in that midfield. He sort of brings the physicality. He's a really good technician. He's left-footed as well, which I think adds a little bit more balance. And he really sort of brings out the best of Vitinha and João Neves, who are great in terms of being, so I think aggressive and tenacious and sort of scrappy midfield. They seem to press teams into all kinds of issues. They force so many turnovers, which is to Mark's point about, in order to get those counter-attacking opportunities, you've got to win the ball first off a team who kind of got sort of set up possession. And there's been some great moments. I think both John McGinn and Phil Foden have had moments when they played in Paris this season where they kind of got the ball on the half turn against the press and just been, had 2 or 3 PSG players swarm them instantly and foul them. So they're good at being scrappy. They're definitely not a team that, for the possession they have, they're not too nice by any means.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting.
I mean, yes and no. They are a bit scrappy, but we actually checked the stats in last podcast, like fouls per 90 in the Champions League this season, yellow cards per 90. PSG is one of the cleanest teams. Like, we were at the bottom, like third to bottom when it comes to the cleanest team. For me, that's something we have to work on. I would like to see some tactical fouls from this team. We can become a bit more dirty. Even though, with yellow cards and suspension in the UCL, we have a great squad. So that's actually something I think we need to improve on. We need to become a bit more dirty, make a little bit more fouls, take a little bit more yellow cards.
thing about them, isn't it? I mean, we live in an age when a lot of people are saying that some football teams are too passive or too controlled, and you watch PSG and their intensity is just off the charts. I mean, I think obviously they beat Liverpool, then Villa, and then Arsenal in successive rounds, which Premier League fans were probably thought they'd come unstuck in one of those games at least. But do you want to talk us through their actual press, Liam? Because it is pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, it's something I've really enjoyed this season. It's for a long time we associated PSG with a team that weren't really aggressive enough defensively, and they kind of looked a bit awkward to watch in knockout rounds and round 16 games a couple of years ago where they were behind and didn't really have the intensity. And you're just going to sit there and watch yourself get knocked out. But they've been really aggressive this season. They kind of started quite man to man actually, and worked really well as a blueprint that worked for them in Ligue 1, where I actually think teams can be a bit more aggressive against them and try and be a bit more elaborate in their playing out than people perhaps realise. But deeper into sort of the knockout rounds now, we've seen a bit of a tweak. So previously, and we've got some graphs to illustrate this, we'd have it where there'd be sort of the winger would be up on the edge of the penalty area alongside Ousmane Dembele to lead the press, and they go man for man that way, and that would mean Hakimi would have to go all the way to the opposition fullback. So that'd be your right back jumping to the fullback, and then you kind of man for man on halfway and everywhere else. The tweak we've now seen, and I think the first one was against Villa. In the quarterfinal was actually dropping sort of the winger a bit deeper, setting both your wingers against the opposition sort of fullbacks, leaving Dembele up on his own and saying your job really is just to go and cut the pitch in half. We'll go man for man, so in the middle of the pitch, Hakimi can step up to the number 10, so he's now not quite as aggressive. You keep Nuno Mendes, who's the left back, a little bit deeper on the left hand side. So
No, I didn't know that we've changed like the pressing thing, because as he mentioned, usually it's Hakimi who goes there and then one of the midfielders drops back. But this is actually better for like recovery, because then Hakimi isn't pushing up too much. So
quite be 1v1 on halfway or 3v3. It's going to be more like a 3v2 now, and that worked really well against Villa, who actually did end up scoring when they actually managed to finally get through off sort of a second ball that they won, and I think someone tackled Nuno Mendes and they worked their way through. But for the most part, Liverpool at home I think especially was a really good example of how aggressive they can be, and even when teams do have the options then hit someone and go 1v1 and get an out ball, they've stood up really firm in the duels, which I think, as Mark mentioned earlier with regards to Inter, is really the execution of this system. It can be a good idea on paper to go man for man, but you need the players and the profiles to actually do that.
Yeah, you need the bravery as well to do it. And I guess we've touched on this already, is that sometimes that bravery does desert teams in showpiece finals, but it doesn't feel like this PSG team will do that, but we'll find out. I mean, anyone, as we've just said there, who's watched the games can see that, Mark, but can we reflect that in the raw data as well?
In the numbers, yeah, I'll refer to PPDA here as a metric, passes per defensive action, which, a metric many people be aware of, looking at pressing intensity quite simply. And we've done it across a rolling average going back to the 2018-19 season for PSG in the Champions League. And I guess the short summary here is that since Luis Enrique has come in at the start of last season, there was a notable uptick in their intensity, their pressing intensity off the ball. As much as anything, it's just been sustained this season, which, Liam, I know you've spoken about this before as well.
I mean, you can see it right here underneath me, Bob. So interestingly, so when Tuchel came in, look how low it was when Tuchel came in. So right, like we have Unai Emery. He's obviously more counter-attacking manager, less intensity. So Tuchel came in, it went up. Tuchel, continued to be there. It went up. Then when Poch came, Poch is obviously more counter-attacking. It started dropping. Galtier also more counter-attacking. Plus we had Messi, Neymar, and Mbappe. It went down, and then bomb went up again. Which continues the comparisons between Tuchel and Luis Enrique. I always make those comparisons. They are the closest similar PSG managers we've had in the post-KSI era. And you can see Luis Enrique's pressing is obviously the best pressing it's been. But it's not that far away actually from like Tuchel's peak. But it's just the consistency of Luch is better.
In terms of the comparison versus Crystal Gautier, Mauricio Pochettino as well, it was kind of up and down, if not going on a bit of a downward spiral in terms of their pressing intensity, probably because of the personnel of the players that they had to choose from and their lack of defensive discipline or defensive desire at times. But now he's got the players, I mean, Liam illustrated it really well. We've got the players to buy into it and to execute it really well. So yeah, the short answer is there's been a real uptick in their defensive intensity, and it's been sustained across this season.
We should point out really on that viz that how unusual it is for it to be that level, because even the best pressing teams will have games where they sit off, but PSG's commitment to doing it is pretty stark.
Really
I mean, again, partly game set in some of the early ones where they were behind, but I think you see how quickly Luis Enrique coached them into a pressing team. There's a great clip from the knockout rounds last season when they played Barcelona and Kylian Mbappe was then still at the club, and he's in a one-to-one meeting, Luis Enrique with Mbappe, showing a video, imploring him, almost partly sort of demanding and partly almost begging of like, you need to press and step to Kubasi and And I think in that regard, a lot's been made about sort of PSG and not having as many of the superstars anymore. Which
you know what? Just talk about that video. I mean, that video perfectly summarizes why Kylian Mbappe is just not a winner. Because if you're a winner, you have to make sacrifices. Kylian Mbappe never wanted to make sacrifices for the better of the club and for the better of his teammates. And that's why Paris Saint-Germain are a better team without him.
I think is maybe a little harsh and reductive in some sense, because there's some real talent in there and players that will, either go on to achieve big things there or fetch big fees. But I get that they're players earlier on in their career that don't have the accolades that Messi, Neymar, Ramos, etc. did when they came. I think actually Mbappe's.
I mean, look, Messi was old, okay? Messi was old. Messi was what, like 33 when he joined us. So I'm less like mad about him. Neymar actually pressed well. I would say he pressed, was it like on team? So usually you press as a collective. Neymar sometimes did like a solo press where he was just running, killed his lungs. But Neymar actually, when you look at the pressing stats, because I remember I used to compare us to Liverpool, Neymar had like better or as good pressing stats as like the Firmino, the Mane, and the Salah at Liverpool. So Neymar was never the issue. Messi was old. Yeah, he could have done better pressing, but he was old. Mbappe was the issue because Mbappe was being treated as if he was 31. Mbappe, when he was 22, 23, he stopped pressing. He stopped pressing. Not because he's tired. He's an athletic freak. It's because he's an ego.
Departure just helped him a lot there because he just never really pressed. It's an issue France still have now as a national team where he doesn't contribute defensively. He probably makes up for it with his goals, but maybe not makes up for it in a Luis Enrique system where you want the team to press so high and be so aggressive.
Another thing with Mbappe, he wants to have a free role like on the left. Neither left wing nor striker. He wants to be like a left forward. The issue is Deschamps, Ancelotti, Luis Enrique. These managers are like, Mbappe, you cannot play in that position. To play on the wing, you have to do some kind of defensive reinforcement, which he doesn't want to do. And that's why he can only play striker in the future. If not, you play a striker that does the defensive work for him and they switch around like this. That's the only way.
Aggressive.
Okay, so we talked obviously about the myriad attackers and midfielders in both teams and the ways that they can score, but there's going to be two men trying to stop them scoring. Men with gloves on, Gianluigi Donnarumma and Jan Sommer, who are 10 years apart in age, although it kind of doesn't feel like that somehow, but that's by the by. Should we talk through how they've been pivotal so far this season?
Yeah, I think as much as anything, it's interesting for all that we want to talk about tactics and systems. That I mean, goalkeepers are a clear example of this. That finals and knockout stages does come down to individuals, and when you're forced into a save at times, then the individuals, in terms of goalkeepers, are the ones who are spoken about quite a lot. And looking into the numbers on it, of course, at this sort of level of competition, the samples in all of these are quite small. So it's a bit tricky to be too reliable in this regard. But it's still valid to say that Jan Sommer has prevented just over 5 goals in terms of the quality of the shot that he's faced versus the reality of how many goals he's actually conceded. And we've spoken widely about how Inter Milan's defensive record has been so strong, kind of pre-Barcelona game, if you like. But to save 5.2 goals is the exact number above expectation across the course of a Champions League campaign, which isn't that long, is hugely important and really quite significant when you think about 5 goals that could have been and how much the game could have easily swung, especially in that Barcelona game, especially in the second leg. There were so many examples from Lamine Yamal. There was the Eric Garcia chance as well, if I recall, that could have just meant that Inter Milan were out of the competition, easily there. So he's been crucial in that regard. And it made me think about, you mentioned Andre Nana before in terms of a couple of seasons ago, how he had, I think, a really good, strong shot-stopping season that got them all the way through to, well, not that alone, but that was crucial in getting them to the final as well. So if you've got a goalkeeper who's able to just perform above expectation in a small sample, obviously absolutely shake hands on that. And obviously it's done them well to this point. I think you'll probably be able to speak better on Donnarumma, Liam, but he's had some crucial saves as well against, I'm thinking of Aston Villa, but also some crucial ones against Arsenal as well.
Yeah, penalty saves against Liverpool in the shootout as well. His penalty record's pretty good. I think he's this is excluding shootout penalties. I think he's saved like 1 in 4 in his career. And obviously, he's done it against England at Wembley and big stages in finals before. He's a funny example because, as we mentioned earlier on, he's been a bit of an issue sometimes with his kicking. Not always been the right goalkeeper for that system. They've actually brought in sort of backup goalkeepers, and I think he's been dropped a couple of times and suffered a really horrible injury earlier on right at the start of the calendar year against Monaco. So the fact that he's fully fit and recovered from that and has found some of his best form is quite fantastic. And Arteta brought it up, didn't he, after the semi-final, saying on a different day you think the keeper won't always make those saves, and that's why he's ultimately in there.
Yeah, the one from Odegaard particularly was. I mean, it would have broken my arm, but he was fine. Well, he had a slight sore shoulder for 5 minutes. I mean, obviously goalkeepers are there to stop shots, but Jan Sommer in particular is good with the ball at his feet and pretty key to how to build up.
Yeah, I think so. We mentioned earlier on about the moves where, sort of dropping it into the strikers, finding a central midfielder and then popping out to the wing back. That needs a keeper that, has the comfort to step forward with the ball, to, play a range of passes. Sometimes it's on the floor, sometimes it's, dinked in or clipped all the way in behind. A big part as well because almost that central centre back tends to push up so high and so aggressive sometimes that, there are a few times where he has some maybe heart in mouth moments of turning away from a defender or being a little bit cool. But that's his style. I think he's done that, for so long now. Not quite the biggest of keepers or the most dominant compared to perhaps Donnarumma. And I think fortunately doesn't need to be so box dominant because he's got 3 centre backs plus, the 5-3-2. And a great stat that I saw, I can't remember who flagged it on social media before, but I think he could be on the verge of doing an iconic double if he wins the Champions League, of winning the UEFA Champions League and the Liechtenstein Cup. There can't be too many players that would have won the same in there. Yeah, the famous double. Can't be too many players that would have won both those in their career.
You'll never sing that.
No.
Okay, well, I think all this discussion promises and looks forward to what should be a pretty amazing final. One for the purists and
100%.
casuals alike. But how's it going to go? I think it's time for some predictions.
Well, I'm just going to defer to the numbers yet again, true to type. Basically, we've got a simulated match prediction model that I built a few months ago now, and I'm going to defer to that and say that the most likely scoreline predicted is PSG to win 2-1. In terms of the overall likelihood of a PSG win, we've got 53% for this model, 27% for Inter, which isn't too out of whack with what I think maybe actually will.
Wow. I mean, you can't see it it's underneath me, but it's 53% PSG win, 20% draw, go to extra time, 27% Inter win. Most likely scoreline predicted 2-1 PSG. 2-2 also likely. So you see, that's the circle. So the likely ones are like 2-2, 2-1, 2-0, 1-1, 2-1 to Inter, 3-2 to PSG, 3-1 to PSG.
That's an outrageous scoreline.
Wow.
From Inter 1-0 up, a PSG comeback.
We're heavy favourites.
I mean, that would mean both teams have scored, which would lead to wild celebrations amongst people like goals. Me, basically. What about you, Liam?
No, I think 2-1's a fair, yeah. I mean, it's difficult, right, in the sense that there's probably about 3 or 4 scorelines any game often is likely to be.
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
You know, apart from the Barca 3-3 Inter game that no one's predicting. That,
Yeah.
you know, if I say 1-0, I've got a pretty good chance of being correct. But
Yeah.
I think PSG, I think they're probably a better team overall than Inter now. And we've had it the 4 previous Champions League finals and European Cup finals in Munich. We've all seen a first-time winner, which was Forest, Borussia Dortmund, Chelsea, and of course Marseille. So if PSG don't manage to do something that Marseille did all those years ago for the same trophy, I think that'll be yeah. You can imagine how that will play out.
Yeah, and Paris, but city the size of Paris never having landed at the European Cup is an anomaly.
Unfashionable.
Just lastly, quickly, tactically, what's the more important win here? Like, is it, if we just take the sort of club stuff out of it, is PSG winning kind of a bigger win for sort of modern approach to football, or is it an Inter win? Would that be like a nice sort of throwback to, you know, you can win with a 5-3-2 and two lads up top?
Yeah, I don't want to say a bit of both, but it feels like a bit of both for me. Because Inter haven't had the budget that PSG have had to do a lot of signings on free transfers. It's probably a great way of saying how you can sustain the team at the top for so long. We spoke about all the cups they've won, how deep, you know, how many league titles they've won.
Losing also their best players
which is an Asian squad
consistently.
now that they are so tactically outlined. I think PSG are kind of, I think, especially now with it being almost a purer way than what they were doing previously with throwing big money at sort of superstars, where they're the way that I think a lot of teams or coaches want. That's like the ultimate, you know, the philosophy coaches that want to see that Barcelona style, the high pressing, where, you know, they're very, I think, different ends of the spectrum. But I think that, to use a Mark Carey's, is the style to make fights, right? It's why it's so good that I think as a tactico you can kind of come out as a winner on both ends of this. I was very pro Inter a couple of years ago, and now very pro PSG. So I feel a bit like I'm watching my 2 kids playing in the same final or something.
No, I do agree. I think it just shows as much as anything that there is more than one way to win a game of football, and this is just a really nice way to showcase that in a final. Because if it were to be maybe a PSG and a peak Manchester City, then it's kind of a bit more of a head-to-head, toe-to-toe of similar styles. But to show that whoever comes out on top, that there's different approaches to try and win the game, is refreshing, which I think is about as diplomatic answer I could possibly give.
It's a victory for coaching, whoever wins, and we can all get behind that. That's it for today. A massive thank you to Liam and to Mark.
Shout out to Liam, shout out to Mark, and shout out to the host. Shout out to the Athletic FC for this reaction video. You know, one of the best like preview-esque videos I've watched. Some of the stuff they mentioned I knew, and I was like, yo, great to hear that they can talk about it as well. And then the statistics they showed gave me some extra glimpses, you know, Inter attacking more down that right-hand side, how great they are from set pieces. Also, you know, showing that they have great knowledge about Paris Saint-Germain. I mean, these are the kinds of videos you want to watch. These are the kind of videos you want to react to, because you're seeing 2 people that know a lot of stuff. They told me maybe some small stuff about PSG. Maybe I didn't know. I felt I knew everything. But when it came to Inter, they gave a lot of good comparisons. And it's always nice seeing, you know, a non-PSG perspective talking about Paris Saint-Germain talk about Paris Saint-Germain without the agenda, without the disgustingness. Because most people that talk about my beloved club Paris Saint-Germain, they have to add in their hatred and bias and agendas. These here are strictly talking football. They went with Paris Saint-Germain and their metrics saying Paris Saint-Germain 2-1. Everything sounds right. I'm really excited for this final. More Inter Paris Saint-Germain coming on the way. But hopefully you guys have enjoyed this reaction video. And yeah, comment down below what's your prediction for Paris Saint-Germain versus Inter in the Champions League final. That's been it from boy PSG, and as usual, allez Paris.